Hello, guys. Welcome again to another Donoram Monologue podcast. I am again your host, Beau. I have been accused of flying through those intros, but I mean, you clicked on the podcast, you know what it is, and you know who's hosting it. So I don't feel that. You know what? I have more faith in you than having to tell you what you're listening to, and you just clicked on it. We're not like other podcasts that tell you how to think, even though we kind of do that all the time. But before I go any further, one thing I do want to take note of, because we're very appreciative of the sponsorship, I want to mention our sponsor, Ashley Luann K on Instagram. Those links, as always, are in the description of these videos. Again, I strongly encourage you to take a look at that, and especially right now, as nursing is such a huge topic in the world, I think she's giving a really neat perspective on that, and I do mean that. My wife's a nurse, so I do. Nursing is something that hits close to home for me. So please check her out there. We'd really appreciate that. I know she would as well. Guys, I told you I was going to be doing a sort of intermittent series on each generation of consoles and which console I liked best in that generation. We started with fourth because, of course, to talk about 1 through 3 is stupid because the winner and your favorite, face it, is so obvious in each of those. But fifth generation, this is something I'm actually pretty contentious with my fellows here at Donoram, because I know Adam far and away was an N64 because that's what he owned. Don, I don't actually know your favorite in the fifth generation. Don's is also an N64 guy, so this is going to get interesting. So, again, if you remember in the fourth generation, I told you that I owned a Sega Genesis. My friends owned Super Nintendos. I feel objectively that the Super Nintendo was the best system of that generation, and the Sega Genesis just happened to be my favorite. I'm going to be doing that this time. I'm going to just go ahead and tell you what I think flat out, and then we'll go into the defenses of those. The one I feel objectively was best and my favorite actually was the Sony PlayStation. The Sony PlayStation was it did what the Super Nintendo did before it. It spoke to us about the future, and it did take risk. And because of the decision of the Nintendo to go with cartridges, they just lost so much third-party support. And while that not in and of itself is a bad thing, because Nintendo's first party is more than enough to keep Nintendo afloat on its own, let's face it, these third-party developers did wonders with these games they decided to develop for PlayStation. In fact, most game series that existed before the Sony PlayStation had their best iteration on the Sony PlayStation, and some of them have not had a better one yet. The first thing that comes to mind is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Masterpiece. Greatest Castlevania game of all time. Better than all before, better than all after. It happened on the Sony PlayStation. It happened because of the Sony PlayStation. So, I will tell you again why I think Sony PlayStation is objectively the best and why it's my favorite as well. But before I go into that, guys, I love the Nintendo 64. I really do. There can only be one winner, though, so I chose my winner. But, guys, first off, it's when Nintendo decided to stop. Nintendo decided to go with personality. Nintendo has a great personality. It's the Disney of video game companies, and I don't need to tell you how I feel about Disney. So, of course, I love the Nintendo 64 as well. And even just the console. Just the console is so much. I mean, it's got curves for no reason. It just, it has stuck with its classic feel. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this AC the analog adapter, I believe you could use Super Nintendo ones and it would still work. And GameCube. So that's kind of neat that you could just use one of those. But it had the memory expansion, which Adam actually has a memory expansion. That's neat. But you needed that to play Brood War, didn't you? Yes. You needed that to play Brood War, and you needed to do anything in Perfect Dark other than multiplayer. Anything, right? Was that correct? Yeah. Because I didn't have one, so when I rented Perfect Dark, all I could do was multiplayer. And Perfect Dark and GoldenEye are actually two sacred cows in video gaming that I don't like. We'll get into that later. If you want to hear why and hate me for it, like and subscribe. You'll know when those videos go live. So, guys, the Nintendo 64 had so much personality, and it was when Nintendo decided, we're going to go big with our first party things. And most people claim this is the biggest leap in technology in video gaming. I disagree, but I think it's one of the most important things video game ever decided to do. Super Mario 64 being the first great 3D platformer. It was the first great 3D platformer. There were a few before it, but it was the first one that was fantastic. It was great. In fact, one of my heroes, my favorite game director of all time, Tetsuya Nomura, would never have directed my favorite game series of all time, Kingdom Hearts, had he not been at home playing Super Mario 64 and just was floored by it. Just like, wow. And that's one of my favorite stories about him because he genuinely loves video games. He played this game just like we did. And he was a grown man when he played it. I played it as a child. He was a grown man and was still enchanted by the magic of Super Mario 64. One of the things that made Super Mario 64 magic, and I don't think a lot of people talk about it, is the 64 controller. Now, Generation Z likes to malign this 64 controller because they weren't there. So the confusing thing is, who has 3 hands? Well, that's not the way you hold it, stupid. You could hold it like this or like this. There was 2 options for holding the 64 controller, and I still think it's comfortable as all get out. Fellows, would you agree? I think the 64 controller is one of the most comfortable controllers of all time. Like it feels right. And while I don't like the shooters for the 64, I think they're sacred cows that we just refuse to admit aren't as good today as they were when we played them as children. I do admit the Z button is the perfect trigger of all time for a first-person shooter. Yep, it's literally a gun. It's not on the right hand. Well, it is if you're a lefty. But another thing is this. The analog stick. This was the gold standard. This transformed. This is what made those 3D platformers great, because the other ones before it were demanding you use this. Makes no sense. This is fluid. This is fantastic. It's great. That's why the 64 is still the gold standard for 3D platformers. Almost all the best ones were on there. Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64. These games were great because of that, not in spite of it. And of course, we all remember Mario Party minigames. And of course, when you swung Bowser around, the best way to do it was that right there. It's just it's something that each gamer of that generation remembers, and it's just something that's really fun. You had a 6-button controller. These were effectively 4 more buttons, these C buttons, but they also served as sort of a prototype of that right control stick for later when we would get camera controls in games that were frankly much better, but you can hardly blame the 64s for being the way they were. And also, an interesting fact about the Nintendo 64, that right there is where your memory card went. If you on the few games that needed a memory card, and that so much space was taken on the cartridge, it could not use a save file. The only game I could think of off the top of my head that required a memory card was Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. Or Goemon, sorry. And now, it kind of also the Rumble Pack, that was revolutionary. That was absolutely cool that the 64 did. There was a Rumble Pack that went in here, and now there's not a single game controller I can think of that doesn't have Rumble features. None. And it all started with the Rumble Pack inserted right here. Fantastic. I believe the first game to feature that was Star Fox 64. The earliest shipments of Star Fox 64 actually had the Rumble Pack as a pack-in with the game. So having said all that, yes, the 64 did revolutionize 3D platformers, 3D action RPGs too, with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. I feel like the future was more stated on the Sony PlayStation, because the Sony PlayStation caught on to that analog stick and that rumble feature, and of course released the DualShock controller. Was it a copy? Yes, but in some ways it also perfected it because it did provide that right analog stick, which games like Ape Escape took advantage of, in that you would control your character with one stick and the sword with the other stick, being able to slash in all 8 directions, so to speak. And so the PlayStation was, and it was kind of weird because it was Sony's first foray into consoles. It was, most people don't know this, it was actually an answer to the Sega CD originally. It was going to be an add-on for the Super Nintendo. PlayStation at the last minute decided to make their own console. And I believe there was at least one model of that Super Nintendo PlayStation that was made, and it was just bought for an outrageous amount of money at a convention somewhere. But yeah, the Sony PlayStation, of course, is the reason why JRPGs got so big in the West. So I'll admit a little bit of bias there. I'll admit that. But action games, Metal Gear Solid, the idea that full voice acting can happen on a game on that CD, absolutely really cool. I mean, it really changed the way we play video games. It changed the way they told a narrative, and I think that's important. Full motion video, FMV, and you guys know that we here at Donoran, we love the idea of video games as an art form, as a way of conveying a narrative. I've spoken till I was blue in the face about why video games are a more effective way of telling a narrative that personally touches the person experience it. I'm not going to go into all that again, but needless to say, full voice acting, full motion video, things of that nature that were capable on the Sony PlayStation to a greater extent than any other system in the 5th generation. I think that's a huge feather in its cap. I think that's a huge reason why that was. The Sony PlayStation adapting to where its competitor did outdo it, I think is a good move on its part, on the part of the developers behind that. And again, I will always stand firm with so many series that and so many series took weird risks on the Sony PlayStation. Stay tuned. We will be going over an amazing video game, Mega Man Legends, soon, me and Don. And Mega Man Legends was not the black sheep, because I think everyone loves it, but it was the odd child in the Mega Man family. Super cool. So guys, as always, like and subscribe. I feel so weird to say that. I feel like everyone just says that kind of like robotically at the end of their videos, but we really do appreciate every like. We really do appreciate every subscription. And let me know in the comments. Am I wrong? Do you feel I'm wrong? I think that the 5th generation was one of the most important generations of home video game console. It's where most of us went from playing video games when we didn't have anything else to do to playing video games because that's what we wanted to do. It was instrumental in making me someone that loved video games as an art form. And I think the Sony PlayStation played a bigger role in that than the Nintendo 64, but the Nintendo 64 did play a role in that. Most of you will notice that I did not mention the Sega Saturn. So anyway, like and subscribe. Be sure to share this with your friends if you liked what I said. Even if you didn't, maybe they will. Share it out. We appreciate every single share just as much as every single subscription. This past Sunday's episode of Xenogears, the podcast, we issued a challenge while we were doing it. 1,000 likes on the YouTube video, or 1,000 downloads of the podcast, and I will quit my job. I will give my boss the middle finger. I will put unimaginable strain on my marriage. I will turn my life upside down to play through all 3 episodes of Xenosaga sequentially, all at once, just barrel through them. I don't know that we'll be able to stream it on Twitch, but we will get it to you on YouTube if we can. I will do that for you guys, providing live commentary as I experience it. You will experience the whole game, not just the highlights. When I'm grinding and cussing because I can't beat a boss, you'll still be there. And if we achieve 1,000 likes on the YouTube video and 1,000 downloads on any of our podcast repositories, if we achieve both of those, I will do so in cosplay. Cosplay to be determined by you, the fans. Bear in mind that I am a child of God, and I will stay modest. So no Kill la Kill cosplays. So guys, again, so thankful for every view, so thankful for every share, subscription, and so forth. Please stay safe out there, and be active in the comments. We love that. Thank you, guys. We'll see you later.